Good afternoon to you all. It's so nice to be here with you. Thank you to the Commission for having me to moderate this panel, which gathers us today to a conversation about the recommendations by the Truth Commission that were issued for the country. Some of our guests are going to enlighten us, and we are going to start the panel with a presentation by Mark Freeman. He is the director and founder of an international organization called the Institute for Comprehensive Transitions, or IFIT. They have an office in Colombia. Mark is an expert on transitional justice, conflict resolution, human rights. He's been the advisor for several negotiation processes, including but not limited to the Colombian process. Mark was the advisor for Colombia in the negotiations in Havana with the former FARC guerrilla. And he is invited today to join us to reflect briefly on the experience, international experience, in relation to the implementation of recommendations of the Truth Commissions. There's always a huge question arising during these spaces. How successful have been the implementations of Truth Commission recommendations throughout the world? It's been 30 years of Truth Commissions around the world. Most of them end up with final reports with important chapters on recommendations. So please, Mark is going to present this information. And now we have a conversation as well with Armando Balbuena. He was already introduced in the prior moment. Armando is YU indigenous member. He is part of the monitoring and surveillance committee that was just appointed. He was also a president of the ONIC, an important social leader. Julia Cogoya, who was also introduced. Julia is also part of the monitoring and surveillance committee. She was also part of the Caribbean Truth Commission team. We have Jorge Restrepo, an economist, a professor of Javeriana University, and director of CERAC, which is a study center that was very important for the conflict. He knows the conflict very well in Colombia, the peace processes as well. And we have Oscar Sanchez. Oscar is the director of EduCapaz. EduCapaz is, he was the Secretary of Education in Bogota from 2012 to 2015. EduCapaz has been a strategic partner of the Truth Commission in the educational aspect. And today, in this task of the appropriation of the final report and the teaching in the institutions, educational institutions, Saul Franco will be joining us virtually, Commissioner of the Truth Commission. He was in charge of the impacts volume. He is a physician specialized in public health. He has been working for over 4 years investigating and researching on the impact of the conflict, their impact on health and other dimensions of Colombian society. Without further ado, Mark has the floor. I guess Mark is ready. I guess I can see it. Yes, up there. Okay. Mark, welcome. It's so nice to have you. You have 10 minutes.
Perfecto, pues
That's great.
me
Well,
oigan bien todos.
can you hear me?
Sí,
Can you hear me there? Okay.
perfecto.
Yes.
Bueno, muchas gracias,
Thank
María
you,
Camila,
Maria
y
Camila.
muy buenos días a
Good
todos y
morning
a
to
todas. Antes que
you
nada,
all.
agradecer la
I
Comisión
would
de
like to
Paz,
thank the Truth Commission,
Red Pro de Paz y
Run
la
for the
Unión
Paz,
Europea por
and
la
the European
invitación
Union
a participar
for
en
having
este
me
evento,
here in
que
this
para
event
mí
today,
es un
which is
honor
an
y es
honor.
especialmente
I'm
emocionante
especially
porque
excited
como
because, as Maria Camila mentioned, we had the privilege to be in Havana for a year and a half as one of the advisors in the victims.
Pero hoy el tema que se
But
me
today
propuso
the topic
es sobre
is
qué dice la
what
experiencia
is the
internacional
experience,
sobre la
international experience on
implementación
the
de las
implementation of
recomendaciones para
the
la no
recommendations for
repetición.
non-repetition.
Así que voy a
So
ofrecer
I'm
unas
going to
modestas
provide some
reflexiones y
modest
espero puedan
reflections,
contribuir a la
humble
discusión
reflections on
de este
this
panel.
panel.
Como quizás se ha observado ya en
As you
otros
have seen
paneles,
maybe in other panels,
durante los últimos decenios han
during the
existido
last
docenas de
decades,
comisiones
there
de la
have been
verdad y en cada
tens
región
of
del mundo.
commissions
Y
in the
si
region and
bien
in other
son
regions
todas
of the
distintas
world.
las unas de las
Either they are all
otras,
different
hay algunos elementos,
between each other,
condiciones
there
del
are some
modelo colombiano
conditions and
que
elements of
quisiera
the Colombian
resaltar
model
antes
that I
de
would like to
referirme a las
highlight before
experiencias internacionales.
referring the international
Elementos que en su
experiences, elements
conjunto
that
hacen de la
together
Comisión Colombiana
make the
realmente
Colombian
única
Commission very
y que son
unique
pertinentes
and which
para el
are
tema de las
pertinent for
recomendaciones
the
para la no
recommendations
repetición.
for non-repetition.
Entonces,
So,
primero,
first of all,
decir que la
I
Comisión
want to say that the
Colombiana
Colombian Commission
hace parte de
is
un
part
proyecto de
of
paz
a peace
más
project,
amplio y
a wider
global
peace
que
project
convive
and
a
a
la
global
Comisión y que
project
continúa,
that
embarca
continues,
y suma el
goes,
proceso de
supersedes the
implementación.
Commission and
Y
goes
por
over
supuesto
the
hay otras comisiones de
implementation.
la
And of
verdad
course,
que
there
han
are other
surgido de
truth
un
commissions
acuerdo de
that have
paz
emerged
entre
from a truth
Guatemala, El
commission, for
Salvador,
example,
Sierra Leona,
Guatemala, El Salvador,
ICTJ,
Sierra
Indonesia,
Leone, and
pero la
Indonesia.
mayoría de las
But the
comisiones
most
no
of
hacen
the
parte
commissions are
del
not
acuerdo
part
de paz
of a
más
peace,
global,
global
con sus
peace agreement with their
mecanismos de
mechanisms
dejación de armas,
of
reformas, etc.
abandonment of weapons, reforms,
Segundo punto, la
etc.
Comisión de
Second point, the
Colombia
Colombian
hace
Commission
parte
is
de
part
un sistema
of
integral
a
de justicia
comprehensive
transicional, por
transitional
supuesto
justice
hace parte
system,
del
which is
sistema
part of
integral de
the
paz.
peace
Y tiene un
comprehensive
rol
system,
que
and
ha sido un rol
has
compartido
had a shared
de cara a la
role
respuesta de los
vis-a-vis
derechos
the
de las
response of
víctimas y
rights
de
of
la
victims
sociedad
in
y sin
society,
tener, como ha
and
sido el
not
caso de
having,
muchas
as the
otras
case of many
comisiones,
other
sin
commissions,
tener que
without
suplir
having
vacíos
to
de justicia o
fill
que
gaps of
concebir
justice
de cero los
or start from the
lineamientos para la
scratch
búsqueda de
the
los
guidelines for the
desaparecidos
search
o
of the
para la
missing
reparación.
persons and reparation.
Y este hecho ha sido
And this
considerado un
fact
activo
has
importante de
been an
la
important
Comisión en
asset in the
Colombia.
Commission in Colombia.
De nuevo, que en términos
Again, in
cualitativos no ha
qualitative
tenido paralelo
terms,
en el mundo
is
con ciertas
unparalleled in the
excepciones
world, with certain
cualificadas,
qualified
como las de
exceptions like that
Sudáfrica,
of
Timor
South
Oriental o
Africa
Túnez.
and Tunisia
Pero, por cierto, habrá que
and
analizar que en
Timor.
términos de la reconfiguración del
As for
mismo
the
sistema,
configuration of the same system,
sin una de sus
without one
unidades.
of its
Pero esto
agencies.
está
But
pasando en
this is
Colombia por
happening in
diseño, no por
Colombia,
mala suerte, así
not for
que
bad
más
luck,
allá de nuevos desafíos,
but
a
it's
mi
new
modo de ver
challenges.
también se
From my
puede
point of view,
prever
we
nuevas
can expect new
oportunidades en términos de
opportunities
fortalecimiento de
for
los demás
strengthening
componentes
the
del
other
sistema.
components of the system.
Una tercera distinción sobre
A
Colombia
third
frente a la
distinction of
experiencia
Colombia
internacional
vis-a-vis the international experience,
es que si bien es un hecho que la Comisión
either it
Colombiana ha
is a
hecho un
fact that the
trabajo
Colombian Commission
muy
has made an
impresionante en
impressive
4
work in
años
4 years
de
only,
tanto trabajo
with
y
all that
pero también
work,
ha sabido
it
aprovechar de
has
referentes
been
y
able to take
desarrollos
advantage
anteriores como lo
of
fueron
previous
los avances
developments
de
like the
justicia de
progress
paz, la
of
ley de víctimas y sus
peace and
mecanismos
justice, the
fiscales,
law of
pero sin
victims,
quitarle nada de
and
la
so on and
comisión.
so forth. But without
La
removing
realidad es que
merit to
pocas
the Commission,
comisiones
the
de la
reality is
verdad
that
del
few
mundo
commissions
han
of truth in
sido
the world have been
establecidas en un país
established
con tanta
in a country
experiencia
with all that experience,
institucionalidad previa en temas de justicia transicional,
institutionality,
algo que creo ayudará
something that I believe will help
definitivamente en lo que viene en
to
esta nueva
design
etapa.
uh,
Cuarto,
the structure for
hay que
this new
reforzar la
stage.
fuerza y la
In the
capacidad
fourth place,
organizativa de la
we
sociedad
must
civil
strengthen the
y de las
organization capacity of
asociaciones
the
de
civil
víctimas en
society and the
Colombia,
victim
porque en realidad
organizations
pocas veces en
in,
mi vida
in
he
Colombia.
visto este
Few
nivel de
times in Colombia
know-how,
have I
de
seen
organización,
this level of
algo clave
know-how and
para cualquier
organization, something
comisión de
key
verdad,
for any
pero
truth
también
commission, but
clave
also
para la
key
implementación de
for
sus
the implementation of
recomendaciones.
its
Y de nuevo,
recommendations. And
pocas
again,
comisiones de verdad
few
han tenido
truth
aliados
commissions have
locales
had
con el
local
ICTJ,
partners with this level
además de una
of
comunidad
knowledge in addition
internacional
to the
constante
international
tan
community
solidaria
so
y activa
supportive
en su
and
apoyo
active in
a
its
este
support
ecosistema
to
de
this
construcción de paz.
peace building
Quinto,
ecosystem. In the fifth place, fifth bullet, fifth exceptional characteristic of the Commission,
colombiana es el
Colombian
hecho de que
Commission, is the
tenga
fact
un comité de
that
seguimiento
there
que
is a
tenemos hoy
surveillance
en
monitoring
primer
committee that we
conocimiento,
have the privilege to
aunque no
know
ha
today,
sido
even
sistemático en
if
la
it is not
experiencia
systematic in the
internacional de las
international
comisiones de
experience of the
verdad.
truth
Y eso
commissions.
es relevante,
And this is relevant
pues si
because even those that receive the recommendations are the public agencies and the society as a whole, a monitoring committee, has undoubtedly an important value in the surveillance of the implementation process. This should not be conceived as a second truth commission. Rather, its value is in the dialogue with those who must implement the recommendations and communicate with the country the developments of the implementations. And in the sixth distinction, and it's obvious, few commissions of truth have had political context so favorable and beneficial at the moment of delivery of the final report. As a matter of fact, with certain exceptions like Argentina, Morocco, and Ghana. But this fact creates an unprecedented opportunity because instead of focusing the efforts in fights with a government in opposition to the legacy of the Truth Commission, must focus instead to ensure that recommendations are crystallized effectively. Also, I think that it can be important that in a context like this we prevent the recommendations to become a government policy, to turn them into political things and segmenting them. Colombia has the opportunity to work for the implementation process to be more inclusive than exclusive and to contribute to the reduction of polarization. Just to end, I want to stress very briefly and pragmatically three lessons learned as for the international experience in this regard. First, the challenge of several recommendations. The most of the truth commissions make several recommendations. One decision that is understandable given the complexity of a long period of repression and war. The risk, however, is that this results in a public wrong perception that nothing will happen. Nothing happened after the communication of the final report, saying, for example, that only 10% of the recommendations have been implemented. In this vein, the challenge for the monitoring committee and the civil society in this new stage is to know how to foster and stress a qualitative monitoring and not a quantitative monitoring, leveraging the accrued criteria by the Truth Commission in its report. A second lesson is avoiding centralizing the implementation efforts of these recommendations. Rather, promote the decentralized process, inclusive, that fosters the society to empower the recommendations. In that regard, the committee, a monitoring committee of 7 people, 7 recognized leaders, should not take an excess of responsibility for what comes next. Better can formulate hints on new steps and essential steps and complement the leadership in civil society. And lastly, the importance of the media to promote the ownership of the recommendations in the social level and to promote its implementation. And here, the key point is to recognize the importance of the media to create and design the narrative. The strategy of those who wants to see more implementation and not less cannot limit to dissemination sessions, infographics, and the like. If you want to achieve implementation, the effort must collect the powerful voices that design the speech of society. For example, the media, public opinion, artists, and so to speak. That is a lesson from other contexts. And it is necessary also to have a clear approach strategy to a wide range of journalists to help them understand the wider goal in the effort of implementation,
También
and
hacerles ver que
also
su punto
help
de
them see
vista
that their
y implicación
viewpoint
son muy importantes.
is very
Entonces,
important.
en resumen,
As a
Colombia,
summary,
como he
Colombia,
intentado
as I
expresar,
have tried to
Colombia
express,
tiene ventajas
Colombia has
comparadas muy
advantages in
importantes en cuanto
comparison.
a la implementación y la no
As
repetición.
for
La
implementation and
comisión y ahora
non-repetition,
el
the
comité de
Commission and now the
seguimiento hacen
monitoring
parte de un
committee are
sistema de
part
paz
of a
global,
peace,
hacen
global peace
parte
system, are part
del sistema de justicia
of a justice
global.
system, a global peace
Cuentan con
system.
aliados
You have
expertos
expert partners,
influyentes y cuentan con un gobierno
influencing
democrático que
partners
apoya
in a new
las
government that
recomendaciones.
will support the
Cierro
recommendations.
contando
But I
también
will finish
que
reminding
es importante pensar a largo
that
plazo,
it's important to
en el
think in the long
entendimiento
term,
de que siempre es más
understanding that it's
difícil
always
implementar las
harder to
recomendaciones de
implement
una comisión
recommendation of a truth
en una
commission
sociedad
in a
polarizada,
polarized
en una
society
no
than
polarizada. Y
to
que
do
lo
it
que
in a
sí se pueda
non-polarized
implementar
society. I
hoy,
believe that we can
sí se
implement it
puede
today.
anular
It can be
mañana.
implemented today, but could be
Y así que la mejor
revoked
oportunidad que yo veo
tomorrow.
en Colombia
So the
en cuanto a la
opportunity that I see in
implementación es
Colombia as for the
priorizar
implementation is to
una
prioritize
mezcla
a
políticamente
political mixture,
equilibrada
a
de las
politically
recomendaciones,
balanced
la cual
mixture of the
así se puede
recommendations.
llegar
That way,
sí o
we could
sí
reach
al esperado pacto nacional
certainly to
para
the
la
National
convivencia.
Pact for
Se puede llegar
coexistence.
sí o
We
sí
can
a
reach
la esperada cultura de
the
paz y en
peace
últimos se
culture
puede
and
llegar sí o sí a la no
lastly,
repetición.
the
Muchas gracias.
non-repetition. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias,
Thank you very much, Mark. Your introduction is very useful to start this conversation. What I will propose to our dear guests, panelists, we will have a first round. I will ask a different question to each one of you, and you will have 4 minutes. We are running short of time, and this is a very important topic. We want to make the best use of the time. When you are reaching the 4 minutes, I will give you a sign to know that you need to close your remarks. And at the end, I want to ask the same question to all of you. And we will have 3, 4 minutes. Let's see if we have enough time. We are living a political juncture, I would say an exceptional one, for a Truth Commission final report. And I start off by saying that when the Truth Commission began, many of us said this is the most difficult scenario that a Truth Commission could find. This is how the task of the Truth Commission began. Everything was adverse to the huge task that we had. And in 4 years, the situation changed, totally changed, turned 180 degrees. And today we can assert that we are in the best political moment for what comes next, which is the ownership of that final report and the implementation of the recommendations. Today we have a window of opportunity that very likely we had not seen. I want to be very optimistic. I will be very positive. This is the opportunity window that we have had in 200 Republican history. Some will say that I am exaggerating, but many of us feel this way. And at this point, we have the recommendations of the Truth Commission. Recommendations that you will have read by now, have different nature. There are recommendations that refer specifically to public policies, changes to public policies, changes to institutions, and there are recommendations that make a call summon the society, which have a nature, more ethical, political nature, that that summon the society to undertake this challenge of the necessary changes for the country. Mark said something that I want to elaborate upon for this debate. Mark said he issues a warning. Watch out! The recommendations cannot be politicized. If they remain just in the hand of the government, you will jeopardize the recommendations to be politicized. But I wonder if we are talking about recommendations that have been formulated to create changes in the policies of a country, public policies, and transformation of institutions, the governments have a very important role. And we have a dilemma, which is very interesting. And I want to start with the first question for Jorge, based on this framework that I just mentioned. This is a very specific question. Notwithstanding, notwithstanding the motivation that we have in this current context, what do you think that promotes and what hinders the implementation of those recommendations? Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I must answer the question, or can I say whatever I want? No, you must answer the question. This is in order. To answer the question, and again, as I think, thank you for the invitation. It's truly an honor. I think I want to answer this very briefly in the next manner. A recommendation is not implemented. A recommendation is that, a recommendation. And in the specific case of the recommendation of the Truth Commission, as they are recommendations for non-repetition, that's the core, the fundamental axis. What you should seek or aim at is the way those recommendations can coordinate with the implementation of public policy programs and with the commitments of the final agreement. That way, the favorable or beneficial elements for the implementation of those recommendations, if we want to call them that way, should be the conditions for the implementation of the final agreement. There are elements, and let's say the coordination with public policies defined by the new government, the next government, in such a way that I believe that there are favorable elements in the political willingness that the President of the Republic has expressed, and the public willingness expressed the day before yesterday in his inauguration speech. The President of the Congress, one of the adverse elements, I would say, the surrounding, the environment, or the lack of an opposition to the implementation of the peace agreement. The political agreement is healthy to identify which recommendations could be have limitations once they are put into practice or implemented. And finally, a negative element or a constraint for the implementation of those recommendations is the lack of resources, the lack of money. Economic conditions will be an adverse element to be able to implement new public policy programs and to reformulate the public policy programs that require important resources, including, for instance, according to me, from those recommendations of the Commission of Truth that have to do to a amendment, a reform to the public security sector and the national plans. I mean, those who are in the peace agreement, including those that have to do with illicit crops substitution and the rural comprehensive reform, which are the most expensive ones and that require a change. Did I answer the question? Very well, thank you. And very thorough with the time. The day the Truth Commission introduced the country the final report, President, the President-elect, not sworn in office yet, Gustavo Petro, received from Father Pacho the recommendations of the Truth Commission, and in that event committed to implement the recommendations. And has reiterated that commitment oftenly. He said that in his sworn speech. We will have a government commitment to the incorporation of those recommendations very likely into his government plan. How will that happen? That's an important question. But I would like to ask Oscar, who also has been participating. I think you're still in the uh, delivery team of education team. Which ones do you think, or better, how to have these recommendations to be owned by the Colombian society? Because we have a level that of course is that of public policies, the decisions made by the government. The education minister announced that the report will be disseminated in the education system. Maybe you think, or you've been thinking about that recently, but the question is, how, what other ways, what other means can we use to make the society, and in a transgenerational perspective, can have the society to own the reflections by the truth commissions in their conclusions, so that we can move in the direction of the transformations that the recommendations suggest. Thank you, Camila. When you hear a president of the republic that will follow in lockstep the recommendations of the Truth Commission, we should be optimistic. In lockstep, in principle, but since the state is so complicated in the context wherein the Colombia moves the relationship between the state and the citizens, it's so confrontational. It's difficult to conceive these citizens feeling that the citizen is really part of the state. The state is one and the citizen is one. What some people call political country, social country. If you achieve that symbiosis, the optimism should be moderated. And the action of the state goes through understanding that the rights of those citizens are services, their bureaucracy, and budgetary topics. There is an important crack. The people expect the state to resolve specific issues, but also the inclusion, the opportunity to be part of, to maintain a conversation. Both things should be considered. More importantly, how does that conversation start? So what's the spirit? What's the pitch of that conversation? Lucia introduced chapter 8 of culture and education in the recommendations. We participated in the construction of that. That idea is beautiful, and I will refer specifically to that example. Definitely, this is a matter of what we learn, what we feel, and what we know. In the one hand, unknowingly, just by culture, and in the other hand, because we have been taught that, I mean by education. Culture is more powerful and expeditious. When you learn to speak that conversation, you learn that in the street, in the family, in the world, what you hear, and then comes the education. The education must perform a deliberate exercise to find learning, planned exercise. That's more difficult. This is very important because we have the people, we have professionals, we have 330,000 public teachers, half a million in total. And in this specific context, for things to happen, just to answer your question, at least I think that there are three challenges. One is what Freeman said: understand communication as a power. understand that power in the media in this breakage of new dialogues. For example, August the 12th, we have the school embraces the truth, and in the media covers a poor segment. And I asked the director why, and he said our journalists are following now social media. So we have a problem in the way social networks work, and the journalists believe that the news is in the social networks. We have a problem with assertion in the recommendation of the Truth Commissions invite us to take a look at the churches, the media, the narrative, the sensitivity, the awareness that emerges from the artistic expressions that reach the spirit. One, secondly, education into dimensions, one that we call the education growth. That means in socioeconomic aspect, and for the reconciliation, it's good that the recommendation talks about the social and emotional growing for the reconciliation. And there you know how to do things at school. We have wonderful networks of teachers, youngsters, professors, which from school see the opportunity to make the flowers that are growing beautifully become gardens. Let's say we must water those flowers to become a garden. And finally, there is a specific reality. The kids in the ethnic and rural world, if they don't have access at least to 9, 11 degree grades of education, and if they don't define their project of life, the academic, cognitive, professional labor, we will deliver them to the world. That's important. I will finish that this coupling, where I had the opportunity to be, we deliver our report to the new government. What was very impressive, the 40, 60 people in education that were there, we had technicians, we received some technicians, but we also received indigenous people and Afro-descendant people, and we had a dialogue, a technical and political alliance, which approaches to a possibility that helps a government that recognizes the complexity of cultures and territories that leads us to other type of possibilities. I believe that all of this involves bureaucratic changes and money. I am very skeptic that this can work if we don't resolve it, giving it political priority. But I trust that President Petro understands this very well. Thank you very much, Oscar.
Eh, bueno, quisiera seguir.
I would like to continue with Saul. I think that he can hear me.
Y María Camila, te escucho perfecto.
The recommendations are the result of a work in depth carried out by the Commission, the result of a diagnosis that was nurtured by thousands of testimonials, the reports that given by the society, the investigation in itself by the Commission. If you have had the chance to read the findings and recommendations chapter, you will see effectively that the recommendations are the result of that in-depth analysis, that in-depth diagnosis, that understanding narrative that the Truth Commission achieved on what the conflict in Colombia has been. But in the same line of thought that we were talking to Oscar, you who were in front of that important chapter on the impacts and resistance of Colombian society vis-a-vis this long armed conflict, this long-lasting armed conflict, all this effort should have a goal, which is transformation of those reasons, those structural root causes, those persistence factors that during 60 years explain that we have been in this long conflict. If that's the purpose, to reach non-repetition, I would go beyond the prevention of new violence. What should be done for those recommendations, Saul, to contribute to that goal of the transformations that this country requires, and also to reach the non-repetition? Thank you very much, Maria Camila. I want to share with all the attendees to this panel the satisfaction that we have been able to deliver this report of the Truth Commission in a favorable condition, as you have highlighted. But I also want to add a piece of satisfaction, which is to deliver, to have the monitoring surveillance committee that has been put together and is official now. And I believe this is another beneficial point. We can rest assured knowing that we give this report in a juncture of hope, of change, of participation, and internally, in the one hand, a decision of the government to implement it. Three times in its speech, in its uh, inauguration, the President of the Republic referred to the recommendations, and now we have a monitoring surveillance committee of this quality and this representative capacity from different streamlines in the country. I have only 3 minutes for your question. I want to clarify first, I want to highlight something that is very important. These recommendations these recommendations didn't come out of the blue by the commissioners. These recommendations came from the people we talked to, came from the reports that we received. We received approximately 10,000 recommendations, and the work that we had was not only to organize, but how to prioritize, how to give shape to create an organic set of proposals, because we're not triggering uh, everywhere. We're trying to coordinate a country project, and we tried fair enough to structure the number of recommendations, those who were more in agreement to set up a country in peace. I want to highlight that this is part of that reality that has been fortunate for Colombia. Nobody won the war by military means, and the one that wins by military means is the one that imposes the truth. It was the Colombian society the one that won the right of truth, and this is the truth that we deliver in these 10 volumes. All the legacy of the Commission is not the truth of a one government from an armed stakeholder or from one social sector. It's the truth of the Colombian society. These recommendations are the recommendations to address the Colombian society. This is very important. And finally, I want to focus in the part of your question on what to do. I think that in order to move from the letter to the practice of these recommendations, from the recommendation to the action, it is necessary to have three fundamental conditions. First, society and the different components of society must own both the recommendations as a whole, and also those according to the specific sector. The whole society should be committed to peace, which is the proposal of the Commission. Peace should have a national commitment. We should be all in that package. And in that peace building, everyone must monitor what they care the most. The farmers should take care of the land aspects and the claim of land for them, but not only the land, but also the means they require to cultivate it, and the young people to own those recommendations that open the future and guarantee their social participation, and so on and so forth, each one of the sectors. If we have the social global specific ownership, there is a core and one of the bases to have these recommendations complied. Secondly, the governments. This is not a 4 years matter. This government, the next governments must commit openly to the implementation and to make it feasible, make them feasible according to the historical processes and possibilities. I think that's another important point. And thirdly, we should say it, since peace is a Colombian issue, international cooperation is important. And in this event, where we are thinking on this, if the international community gathers the substance of the recommendations and commits to support implementation both the UN system and the individual countries as a bloc and the different organizations, international forces that move in this field, if they take over and back up this openly, we could have the appropriate conditions to achieve the implementation. That would be my contribution, and to greet all the people joining in this session and ensure that each step of like this will convince us and commit us all for peace building, for the big peace building, the total peace, which is the peace of everyone, with the solution of fundamental problems that have led war to persist for so many years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Father. The Surveillance and Monitoring Committee has an important task for the next 7 years. It's not only about monitoring the implementation, but also boost the implementation. This implies actions at different levels, especially in this opportunity, as we were saying before. This is a window of opportunity that we have here today with a committed government to implement the recommendations. Surely there's also a willingness to incorporate some of those recommendations into the development plan. Next year, we have the elections at the territories. We are also having the drafting of development plans in the departments, and this is the possibility to deploy an important strategy for public policies recommended by the Truth Commission to have an impact and to incorporate into policies, etc. The civil society also plays a paramount role. As Maria was mentioning before, we're telling the committee you are not alone. There is actually a sector of civil society that is still committed with the implementation of the peace agreement, the legacy of the Trust Commission, and there is a key stakeholder, the network of partners. I would like to ask Julia, in your opinion, what is the role of the network of partners in the implementation of these recommendations for non-repetition? How do you see the partner network in their support to the monitoring committee? Thank you, Maria Camila. For me, it is so important to be here with Maria Camila. I was remembering 20 years ago, or more, 23 years ago, her organization gave me the first humanitarian aid for displaced people. So I think the partner network starts to work before the commission started. And I want to mention this because the partner network, in the time I was victimized, I received aid. Imagine the evolution of the partner network now. As part of the commission myself, and we participated in building the partner network. We built part of the partner network, and precisely this network is writing to me every day asking how to participate in the recommendations effort. My answer is we really need that your agendas of impact or incidents, your agendas of monitoring, your agendas for your own work should include this legacy. They should include the recommendations as a need to boost the implementation. One of the main roles of the Parnet network is to go to territories, the departments next year, and achieve that the development plans, government plans, include the recommendations. That is paramount. For the committee, I think the support The committee needs legitimacy nationwide, in the territories, in the communities, in the organizations, the institutions. And I believe that the first step to legitimacy is from the partner network. The partner network that is putting their trust, as the commissioner did, they're putting their trust in us, and they should be confident that we actually will do it, that we will give back to the territories in a constant two-way dialogue with the partner network to allow coordination. In the beginning, we were talking about the recommendations, not the implementation, but the coordination. How can we manage so that the state will incorporate it into the public policy, but also the partner network to incorporate them in the work agenda? One of the main duties that we have is to go back to the territory with these recommendations and begin to boost and promote, encourage, so that they are the accomplices in the committee positioning and in the completion of the recommendations. Thank you, dear Julia. Armando, well, there are many challenges for the committee, monitoring committee. So this is not an easy task by any means. In a positive scenario like this, even having the political willingness, etc. Armando, the question is, what are, in your opinion, the 5 main challenges of the monitoring committee that started yesterday? From every 100 calories that ICBF must provide to children, we're losing 80 in contracts. So the children will get 20. So common sense of the ICBF, Family Welfare Institute of Colombia, never allowed understanding the differences in different structures of families. That's a key point. Differentials and territories. The Havana Agreement has 3 stakeholders. Those 3 stakeholders, from the executive to the legislative and then to the judiciary, then the referendum, and going back to the executive, to the legislative, to the judiciary, and then it was filed before the UN, and it became a document with universal warranties of compliance. Making this possible, the fundamental recommendation of this commission of surveillance and monitoring, it includes the agreements in Havana, and the purpose is clear in the forward: justice, prospective justice, giving the rivers or handing in rivers without mercury or plastics. How can we guarantee that? That's number 1. That's huge. Number 2, how to socialize in a didactic manner and pertinent manner. The word pertinent has never been used by the Ministry of Education because they don't know what pertinent means. How can we reach to 1,200 mayors' offices, multiplied by the councils and the deputies, who, in the general budget, the municipal departmental budgets, and the general budget of the nation, should include the recommendations of this commission to implement the Havana Agreement, so that it is included there. This commission's priority is a territorial priority, talking to the institutions, mayors' offices, bringing concrete proposals to show and to include in the law of the National Development Plan, and then go into the multi-investment plans, and then included in the nation's budget with a constitutional impact. When we have public policies, they are only state policies without state guarantees, because guarantees are governmental. But when we're talking about public policies for cattle farmers and large owners of land, they have more budget. So these are state policies with state guarantees. This is a second challenge we are facing. It's too big of a challenge. Third, how to solve how the intellect of resistance has created the conditions to listen and to present and file the proposals developed by 10 million people, 10 million Colombian people in Barcelona, everywhere in the world, for the exiled, for their children, for the children who are not yet back to Colombia. How can we put this in the general budget of our nation? How can we do so that the black hair boys and girls born in Norway, in Finland, can come to their ancestral territories? 4. The task of understanding among the most vulnerable people in Colombia, the nomad people who were affected because their space, their vital spell was taken away from them. This is a political that we have. This should be included in the agrarian reform and also in the law of wastelands, especially when we say in Colombia there are no criminals. We have to recognize this. And 5, to recognize, to acknowledge the different dialects of the Spanish language on this social structure of women, this social structure of family. It is not the same to talk about a nomad family in the flatlands as the nomad family in the Chutpa Caribbean area. It is not the same to talk about the Pacific nomad families in the Pacific and the families in the Amazon, nomad families in the Amazon. So this is key. Here we have the actual recognition, objective recognition, spiritual recognition, philosophical, ideological, and political recognition of being a woman from indigenous people, black people, root people, the rights of the land for farmer women, the differential. This is a key factor that should lead. We need to teach this to the legislative, executive power, and the judiciary power. Thank you very much. Thank you, Armando. In these last minutes, I would like to suggest a reflection and hear your opinion about it. One of the recommendations, as I see it, one of the most powerful recommendations of the final report refers to total peace, which is also treated by or addressed by the new administration as one of the goals in the short term. However, when we think about total peace, we are thinking about armed actors, including the National Liberation Army and criminal organizations. But maybe it would be useful to talk about comprehensive peace. And here we're talking about not only armed groups, but also peace, that is suggested by the final report, is peace among society. And I would like to ask every one of you to tell me, what does this mean to you? If you read like all the recommendations and underline this idea of the great peace that Father Pancho commissioners have mentioned, it's impossible not to think about a peace that is the peace of society for this and future generations. Please, 2 minutes, each of you. Oscar, you begin. For me, it is clear. The agreement has a core, the ethical sense of transitional justice. In the case of learning of a human being, you have two ideas, truth and restoration. They are the alternatives to the simple allocation of power. So when we reach a young child or teenager and you ask, what does justice mean for you? They will say something like, if I smoke in the bathroom, I will get 2 days suspension, my mom is gonna scold me. Now, what if we go through a process that understands why consuming, not recognizing the situation that are happening and explaining the truths, and try to find a justice exercise. If there is a penalty, this should be a learning exercise, not to repeat. Maybe you can say, this is not good for health, not good for coexistence. We go through an ethical analysis to ask ourselves why Colombia in a war is deciding to run a restorative exercise based on truth, recognizing and acknowledging the victims of truth. We're talking about ethics here. So I would like to highlight the need to go there. And so I want to make an announcement. There are 165 young people who participated in the 2021 April protests. They are in jail. Some of them are still in jail, but they have not been convicted yet. Regardless of any crimes that they have committed that they must be sentenced for, I would suggest political recognition, not going to impunity. We still keep justice. This would be an important message in this sphere. And finally, I would like to give you this poster. It says, school embraces truth, my school embraces truth, legacy school non-repetition. On 4,000 schools of Colombia, we will be bringing the report and the recommendations and the statements on not only clarifying the truth, but also the ethics for coexistence and non-repetition. This is the essential mission of the Commission, and we are going to the schools to teach this. Thank you, Oscar. Jorge. To answer your question, Maria Camila, the key point here is how to follow up the recommendations for non-repetition. Always think about non-repetition. Thank you, Oscar. And this implies that we must consider monitoring on those recommendations as a process. As Mark Freeman puts it, it's not an end on itself or a quantitative goal. It is a process that implies the owning the recommendations by all the public policy instruments, by the institutions, coordination with the public policies that are drafted in this and the next administrations. We must also understand the limitations of the recommendations. There are limitations in terms of impact. They were not developed in the framework of a public policy cycle, a full cycle. This means that we must be ready for continuous frustration. Building peace implies understanding constant frustration. The impact of those recommendations will probably not be achieved, but we need to be always vigilant on those recommendations, on the non-compliance with those recommendations. This is important, and it is part of understanding the mandate of this monitoring committee. It is a mandate for surveillance, monitoring of the recommendations, but not. It is not about knowing the impact. So tolerating frustration is so important to identify what's going wrong, what is not implemented, and why we are not achieving total or comprehensive or full peace, whatever we want to call it. It is a process that is complex. Thank you, Jorge. Julia. I would like to say that going beyond the recommendations, one of the greatest impacts of the armed conflict in the territories was the fragmentation of social fabric, the division of territories, the targeting, and this continues to happen. Some days ago we were asking ourselves in Montes de Maria, despite signing for peace agreement, there is no peace still. What's going on? And why, despite signing for peace agreements, the communities continue to target each other, fragmented? The victims of sexual violence are in conflict with the spouses of the victimizers who are in the same communities. So I think that comprehensive peace has to address the territorial issues to achieve it. And the farmer communities, ethnic communities, lost the value of governability, the ancestral governability. Their own government is so weak. The resolution of conflicts was put in the hands of armed actors, and it's still in their hands. So I think we need to make an effort from the bottom to identify, based on the impacts, which are the conflicts in the territories that are caused by the armed actors. We have a normative standard framework, farmer framework, where the population goes into fights for the land. So we need to review the impact of the conflict, the public policies related to land that are dividing the territory, fragmenting the territory, the impact of armed conflict on women, the current situation of the local government and the ancestral authorities, so that we can take everything that was lost and we can rebuild on that. This is an important value from the recommendations. We are going to continue to work for this endeavor. We have to go to the schools. When the professor was talking about the schools, when my daughter was 4 years old, and they had a preschool teacher said, today you are not going to a recess, to a break, you're not going to play because you're talking too much. So my girl had her toy on her hand. I'm not giving up my toy because I didn't talk. They called me because she was a rebel. So listen, this is a penalty, right? The sense of justice. Going from these little things at home, at the household, total peace is going from the deepest places of the being. We need to start there. Thank you, Julia. What do you think? I think the elements presented here are really enriching. I understand total peace or the great peace or the comprehensive peace any of
Como
the
la paz como
names.
un proyecto
Peace as a
nacional,
national
yo
project
entendería con tres dimensiones
with three
fundamentales. En primer
main
lugar,
dimensions.
la
One,
paz total es la paz
total
con
peace
todos
is
y todas,
peace
tanto
among
desde el punto de vista
everyone,
político,
politically
los
speaking,
indiferentes, los de derecha,
those
los de izquierda, los
indifferent left
ultimistas, los
wing, right wing,
anarquistas,
communist,
toda la población
Santos
colombiana
followers.
en el segmento
So
político,
all the
todos los
population,
sectores
all the
colombianos,
sectors
el
in Colombia,
empresariado,
the
la fuerza
corporate,
pública, los
the law
estudiantes, los
enforcement,
trabajadores,
students,
los
workers,
campesinos,
farmers,
todos los pueblos
everyone,
étnicos, porque
all
la
the
realidad
ethnic
pluricultural del país
peoples,
se tiene que hacer
because
sentir
the
cada vez más y creo que ahora hay
multicultural
un
reality of the
florecimiento muy
country
grande.
should be highlighted.
Regionalmente también tiene que ser una
And
paz que
we also need
integre
a peace that
absolutamente a todas las
integrates
regiones
everyone,
y
gets
con
all
todos los
the
actores
regions
armados, y
involved,
ahí es muy
as well as the
importante
armed
porque ya se ha
actors.
iniciado
This is
un
important because
proceso
we
de
have started a
negociación con el
negotiation project with
ELN, con
the
las disidencias de
ELN,
las
with
FARC
the
y de
FARC dissidents,
sometimiento a las
and
demás
this
estructuras
is
armadas.
also
En segundo
reaching
lugar,
other
la
armed
paz
structures
total
or
debe ser una paz
organizations.
que tenga
Number
en
two,
cuenta
total peace
todos
should
los
take into
factores de
account all
persistencia de la
the
guerra. Y
persistence
creo que en
of
esto la
war,
Comisión de la
the
Verdad
factors
ya
of
hace
the
al país un
persistence of
aporte
war.
muy grande en
The Truth
reconocer de un
Commission is
lado
making a
las
huge
ausencias o
contribution
la presencia
recognizing the absence or
desbalanceada del
presence of
Estado
the
en
state
términos básicos, en términos de
in basic
justicia,
terms, in
en
justice
términos de
terms,
seguridad,
in terms of
y una paz que mire
security.
lo
This
territorial, que es
peace should
fundamental.
address
Hemos dicho
the
en todos los foros,
territories.
si en Colombia,
In
si la
Colombia,
paz no es territorial,
if
no es
there is
paz.
no
Y eso
territorial
quiere
peace,
decir
there
que
is
tengan
no
una
peace.
presencia, una
It means
participación política
presence,
grande,
political
decisoria en los
participation,
territorios y que se
decision
enfrente el
making in the
problema de
territories
la tierra, de la
to solve
participación
the
del
problem
campesinado,
of land,
etc.
the participation of
El
farmers,
problema del
etc.
narcotráfico, del cual ya se ha
The
hablado,
problem
no
of
es ahora el momento,
narcotraffic,
pero hay que mirarlo porque es
we
un
need to
factor de
address that as well.
persistencia
This
muy
is a
importante en este
persistent
momento. Y
factor
la tercera
in
dimensión
this
de la paz
moment.
total
And the
es que
third
debe ser
dimension
una paz
of
que tenga
total
en
peace
cuenta
is that
todas las
it should
dimensiones
include
de la
all
vida
the
individual,
dimensions of
colectiva y
individual,
social.
collective, and
Y
social
por lo
life.
tanto, que el
So
fortalecimiento grande
it
de
should
la participación
strengthen the
y de la
participation
democracia y
and
de los
democracy
jóvenes.
of
Que tengamos en
young
cuenta
people.
la naturaleza
We should take
que ha
into
sido,
account the
como lo
nature.
mostramos en el informe
Nature
de la
has been, as shown in
Comisión, no
the
solo
Truth
escenario de la
Commission
guerra,
report,
sino una
not
víctima
only
de
the
esta
scenario for
guerra.
war, but
Hay
a
que
victim of war.
reivindicar los derechos de la
We
naturaleza
have to
y hay que sacar la
vindicate
naturaleza de la
the
guerra. Y
rights
finalmente, lo
of
que
nature,
insistimos mucho en la Comisión de la
and
Verdad,
also
una cultura de
a
paz
culture
que
of
nos lleve a
peace
una transformación
that will lead us
valorativa
to
y actitudinal
transformation
muy
of values
importante.
and
Creo que
attitudes.
si entendemos y trabajamos en
I
esas
think
tres
if we
dimensiones
work in
de la
these
paz total
three
como la paz
dimensions,
con todos y
total
todas,
peace
como la paz que vaya al
among
fondo de los
everyone,
problemas que han
a
hecho la
peace that
guerra
goes to
y
the
trate de resolverlos de raíz,
deep,
y como la paz que
that
nos
goes deep,
implique y que
a
se
peace
penetre en
that
todas las dimensiones
penetrates every
de la vida
dimension of
cotidiana, de la vida social
everyday
y
life,
política.
social life, political life. This is how we go to the right path and the sense of total peace. Thank you very much. Thank you, so we're closing this with some words from Armando. The most difficult challenge for peace is unlearning. Learning. Who is a Colombian? A Colombian is a religious person. Two, a person who speaks Spanish. And three, a person of law. Always solving problems with laws. This is why there are 6,138,000 laws. That's shocking, but this is Colombia. Unlearning is not easy. How can we unlearn these three things? How can we tell the new generations that since this Tuesday there are other ways of seeing history and our origin? How can we tell them that the Wayu people, the song was God and the sea was the goddess, and they had the children, the wind and the rain had the sun, and the sea had the wind and the rain uh, went to bed with the earth to produce the animals and vegetables. That's us. In the Western logic, the sun will warm the sea, will create the clouds go along with the wind, and then the rain will drop and the seeds will then bloom, giving colors for people and animals. This is called photosynthesis. It's the same concept. Why don't we change the mindset of 450,000 teachers going through a great tragedy? To be a professor or teacher, it's a tragedy. We need to give in votes, you're giving your dignity, and ask for a loan to go through a major, and then to be promoted, you have to go to ask for more loans from ICTJ and other financial institutions ascribed to FICODE. After they reach the top level with loans, and then their children are in debt. They are in debt because the children need a loan, and then their co-debtor. There's a strategy. That strategy, and these are the people who are bringing the unlearning words for balance and harmony. So the key aspect is to unlearn for new generations, not the laws. We have the majority in the legislative, and we're moving forward. And we have the executive, we're moving forward, but the total peace is based on the Havana Agreement, a legislative act with universal guarantees. And its priority, it's the prospective justice. Any other justices, and the top is intellectual forms of coexistence in many cultures for 50 million Colombians, including 10 million abroad. This is the hardest challenge on learning. Laws are easy. Okay, thank you, Armando. Thank you, all panelists. Thank you, all attendees. This is the end, right?
Yo estoy desaprendido.
¿Quieres decir algo?
Ah, bien.
No, otro
Well, another gift in these days, together with the report and some other material, the report in 11 and 10th the grades. We have a tale. It's a tale about truth by Beatriz Eugenia Vallejo.